Salute is a program for and about men and women who have served our country. Our program includes news about the laws that affect veterans, information on benefits and services, and news from veterans organizations. And now, our host, Bob Peters.
Hello and welcome to Salute. I'm your host, Bob Peters, and with me today is an Air Force veteran, Mr. Bill Crisp. I want to welcome you to the show, sir. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Bob.
And I know you're one of my neighbors, too, so you got special.
Thank you.
Bill, tell us a little about yourself. Where were you born? And
Well, I'm an Okie from Oklahoma City, and I was raised in Oklahoma and Texas. I went to high school in Oklahoma and then finished my senior year of high school in Brownwood, Texas. From there, I went to the University of Oklahoma for one semester and then to the University of Texas. How did I get in the Air Force? Well, it was during the Korean conflict. I was in the Air Force ROTC, which exempted me from the service as long as I made my grades and participated in the ROTC. Mm-hmm. And I found college was a real great thing. I had a 49 Buick convertible. I belonged to a fraternity. I had the world by the tail.
you were living a good life.
I was living a good life, and after I graduated, of course, I would be an officer. Well, it seems one night I tried to make I had a 49 Buick convertible, I tried to make fly in first attempt.
Before you got your wings, huh?
Before I got my wings. I had a sorority girl with me that night trying to get back after hours. And anyway, to make a long story short, I wrecked the car, got kicked out of school, went back to Oklahoma City. My father said, okay, Bill, what are you going to do now? I was draft material. And I said, well, I guess I'll join the Air Force. So that's how that happened. 1952, February, I joined up, took the train from Oklahoma City to Lackland Air Force Base, which everybody at that time remembers as Tent City. We were bringing so many people in for the Korean War that they didn't have barracks. They had tents. It was February. It was cold to start out.
Yeah, the Texas, I remember being in Lackland, too. You know, you get up in the morning, it's cold in the middle of the day, you're sweating.
That is correct.
Yeah, it's a terrible climate.
But we had tents. We had, it was February, we had wood stoves. Lackland was the basic training for all of the United States, regardless of where you were born, you ended up in Lackland. We tried to fight the Civil War there.
Yeah.
We took some wood and started New Yorkers against the Southerners.
Yeah, you know, that probably still goes on today. I'm a Vietnam veteran. That was the same thing when I was in tech school. Was you watched the two of them go round and
Fight
round
the Civil War all over again.
Yeah.
The air police came roaring down and said, hey, you've got the wrong enemy. And while I was there, of course, I went to basic training, learned how to shoot a gun, and took a lot of testing, and they decided that I was material for radar mechanic school. So I was assigned to Keesler Air Force Base. That was in Biloxi. And a lot of people listening to this probably went there. It was the electronics training center for all the United States. I was chosen to do ground control approach mechanics on the radar to fix the radar sets. During the time at Keesler, they posted a notice on the bulletin board. We need aircraft observers. And if you are chosen, you will become a first lieutenant. I didn't particularly care being an airman. That wasn't the greatest thing in the world. So I said, okay, I'll try it. You did have to sign up an extra 3 years after you got out of cadets. which, fine. I had not the foggiest idea what an aircraft observer was.
I guess he watches the airplanes go by, no?
Right, I didn't know. All I wanted to
That's
know.
my guess.
When it said lieutenant, well, fine. They bused us to Moody Air Force Base, the ones that applied, and we took testing. I had no depth perception, but I sort of fudged on the test. And I was chosen. But there was a long line of people waiting, to go to cadets. Well, the story goes, I continued my education at Keesler. I graduated as a mechanic, electronics mechanic on radar. I was sent to Gray Air Force Base. Do you know where Gray Air Force Base is?
No, sir, I don't.
Most people don't.
It's a gray area to me.
It's exactly what it was. When I reported for duty, it said turn back. It was in Texas near Fort Hood. Road going up a hill, dirt road. And they told me where to turn. And as I was going up the road, it said turn back if you have no business. If you went further, you will be arrested and impounded.
Wow.
And I topped the hill, and here's nothing but a couple of barracks and a long runway. And I thought, this is stupid.
What did I get myself into?
Yeah, right. Of course, in the Air Force, you never have a need to know. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I reported in, gave my orders. They took me to the Air Police headquarters. I had to sign a paper. I could not tell my parents where I was, what I was doing. And I signed a paper saying $10,000 fine and 5 years in jail if I told anybody where I was. And I looked around, nothing but cactus and heat and rattlesnakes. My first, and this is very quick, I want to say my first encounter with the airplane, the B-36, that was a Peacemaker. Convair built it, one of the huge airplanes. Well, it turns out one night they got us up. We went out to the GCA trailer. They said, we fired up the trailer. And the next thing I knew, here coming a big airplane overhead, this huge airplane. All the lights were out on the runway. Just as he touched down, they turned the runway lights on as they guided him in. And the minute he started slowing down, they turned the lights off. It was a huge B-36. This was one of 4 storage areas for the hydrogen bomb.
Oh, really?
I was sleeping on top of a hydrogen bomb, but I didn't have a need to know that. The reason I mention that, because that was my first encounter with the B-36. Now let's fast forward. I got into cadets. We flew in B-25 for training for radar observer in the back seat of interceptors, fighter interceptors. I graduated from that. Well, when I got out, the particular airplane that I was to fly in, the F-89, the wings were coming off. So they had nowhere to send us. They had all of these graduates.
Oh, the plane was having mechanical problems with the wings and everything?
Yeah, well, they fell off, and
That's not a good thing.
Only one person I know survived, one pilot, but that was not a good thing.
Oh.
But they had nowhere to send us then, no airplanes. So we went to navigator school in Houston, and that was a pretty nice thing. I did get my secondary navigator's thing. And now when we got out of there, the airplanes had been fixed. Air Defense Command, which I was then assigned to, was of course along the northern border of the U.S. to protect us during the Cold War. I did not fight in Korea. I fought what we could call the Cold War, the second, waiting for the Russians or bear to come over the mountain, as we said. That was our job, was to defend the U.S. And when we got out, we were all assigned bases, starting with Washington State and going across to all the way to Maine. They say never volunteer in service. Did you ever volunteer?
I did worse than that. I volunteered a friend of mine.
Oh, wow.
I was a basic school, and it was kind of boring. And, you know, we were waiting to go to school. They needed a work detail, so I volunteered, and then my friend was Angel. I says, I volunteer Angel. And Angel hated me from that day on because we worked all day. We had blisters. And
I don't blame him.
yeah.
Well, they said never volunteer. So they started with the air bases asking for volunteers to go to. Well, they were all North Dakota, Wisconsin. I mean, it was all along the northern border. Well, people who were from, say, North Dakota, they would, of course, volunteer.
Yeah, right.
And the rest of us, we kept waiting. And then they got to Cape Cod. There was an air base on it. Hey, that sounds like a real good one. Well, how big are you? Well, I'm 6'1", 2", I thought. I'm around 6 foot. Sorry, we can only take people that are 5'8", because it was a different aircraft. It was an F-94, which is very small back seat.
Yeah.
And then they said, and the rest of you are going to Presque Isle, Maine. Somebody spoke up and said, where in the hell is Presque Isle, Maine? The guy says, well, that is hell. Now, most people think of hell as being warm, not so cold.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I have a picture of the plane.
Yeah, before we get to that, I got one quick question for you.
Right.
When you went to the school to identify airplanes, is that what it was? The
job of the radar observer was to, I'll explain a little more as I show you the airplane. I'd like to show you the airplane
Sure.
to show you what the job was. It was not the world's prettiest airplane. In fact, what it was, we had 2 engines, Allison engines. General Motors, not saying anything bad about General Motors, but they consistently blew up. The wings came off the airplane. Later on, the canopy came off the airplane.
Wow.
It was the first $1 million jet fighter built. Okay, its job was to intercept at night. We had no night interceptors.
Yeah.
And they were using F-86s for daytime.
Yeah.
Well, I was the radar observer. The radar is here in the back. And it's a console that you cannot, you can see barely, but it sticks up. The radar console stuck up, and I could not see the pilot. The only way I knew the pilot was there was the reflection in the canopy.
Oh.
But
You had to hope he was there.
really hoped he was there. That was another story when we lost the troop. The pilot, our job was to intercept planes coming from the north, from Canada. The airplane had a 10-minute estimated time of arrival. He had to be within a 10-mile corridor when he crossed the border from Canada to Maine.
So you guys were on alert. You had alert status, right?
That is correct. We had an alert hangar, 4 of these planes set with the warmed up, ready to go. And we were on 48-hour alert.
Yeah.
So we'd be in an alert hangar with our clothes on, and we'd sleep. Well, we had recliners. And 2 men were on, or 2 crews, I should say, were on immediate. And when the klaxon horn went off, you may have been dozing, but the next thing you knew, you were rolling down the runway.
Yeah.
The quarters were upstairs. By the time we were downstairs and climbing into the airplane, the crew chiefs had the engines running and the doors up, and we were strapping in as we were rolling. And that's my job, was to identify or to find the aircraft. We used radar. We were guided as we took off. We were actually handed a code at that point. The code was not given to us until we were actually on getting ready for the mission.
And you might want to put that down. And I know what you got. I know you. The code. What was the code? That's your coordinates where you got to go.
No, that's the code to identify you. So that you usually have 4 numbers or 5 numbers, 6, 3, 2, 1. That was to identify you, so that the Russians, hopefully, if they'd gotten a code earlier, that they wouldn't get the new code, because now you've got a person vectoring you that's giving you on the ground radar, and somebody, hopefully it's a
Oh, so that's basically, so they know who they're talking to.
Right, that
And,
we are
yeah,
friendly
okay, yeah.
and not Russian.
Okay, now I understand.
And so the code, but as we took off, well, then they picked us up on their radar on the border of Canada, the ground crew, the ground radar. They had their target. Now, the problem was we were on the Great Circle. Are you aware of what the Great Circle is?
Nope.
If you go from New York to London, you take off and you would think you'd fly out into the ocean, head straight for London, would you not?
I think that'd be the general consensus, yeah.
Well, you don't. You go over the town called Presque Isle, Maine, directly over almost. The Great Circle, that's the shortest way to England. That base, Maine, was where Lindbergh took off from.
Oh, yeah,
To
when he
go
made his famous flight
Right.
across.
The reason for Presque Isle Air Force Base, because it was the shortest way to ferry airplanes to England during World War II. And that's where the WAFs, Women's Air Force, so that was regression a little bit. Now, back to the mission.
Okay.
Where, as we gleaned, there were a number of airplanes coming back or going at night. Well, coming back from the one from Europe, mostly airliners. And a lot of the pilots could not make the 10-minute ETA or the 10-mile. Even if they were off by 2 miles and they probably knew what airliner it was, we still had to scramble. And we still had to identify it. My job was to listen to the ground control and try to pick out among many airplanes that were in the air, the one that was the target, the one that they were concerned with. So they would guide us and vector us towards the target. Now, the way the radar worked, I had the long range system. And as we got closer and decided it was a target, I would try to lock on. And that was, you had to be within 8 or 10 miles of the target before the airplane would lock on, before the radar would go on automatic. Once I did that and followed it through, then the pilot, he had a small scope in front. And now he was locked on, and he was the one that actually fired the guns. And so my job was short-lived, but important at that time.
Oh, sure. What kind of weapons did they have on that plane? You know?
Well, we started out with a 20-millimeter Gatling gun. We had I found out later, we had a 10% chance of survival against a Russian bomber. But that was never told because we didn't have a need to know.
Yeah, the old need to know.
We would turn tail and ran. During the days, we would practice on, and lo and behold, here comes the B-36. So we would practice trying to shoot down a B-36. And there were 27 of them stationed at Loring Air Force Base, which was 15 miles away from us. This was the largest SAC base in the world in 1952, some 14,000 acres. And they, as I say, they did not keep the hydrogen bombs at there. They kept them at 4 different places in the U.S., including Gray Air Force Base. But we'd get back and we'd make our fighter pass against the B-36. It was a long tube, and it had nothing but guns, top, bottom, side, front, back. And I remember watching them as we made a pursuit pass and rolled in, watching those guns follow us in. And we did not stand a very good chance.
Yeah.
But later on, we had 90% chance of survival. You may ask why.
Well, I was going to ask why, but I was kind of hoping you'd just go there.
Well, some engineer, and the airplane was made by Northrop Aircraft in California, and they realized that it was not a very good weapon, most likely. So they got to work, and they ended up on the end, you see 2 pods.
Yeah, I remember those, yeah.
And each pod was a fuel tank to give us more range. Somebody says, well, let's take off those fuel tanks and put 52 rockets on each wingtip. Well, that was the turning point. We flew, that became what they called the F-89D model. And we could stand off 5 or 6 miles and fire 104 rockets.
104, wow.
And our kill rate was 90% or better. So that's the American ingenuity speaking there. And that's why it's a great country to live in.
Oh, it sure is. It's the best in the world.
It is.
And speaking of their technology nowadays, we'd probably blow our minds what they can do nowadays.
That is correct. That is correct. But just little things, a little turning point. The radar now, I was a navigator, and we had a sextant. You may not remember those. It looked something like a TV camera, but you looked up sky. You navigated by finding the stars, and then you went through books to try to find out where you were. And certainly now we have GPS, and everybody uses. So it was an interesting time for me. I had interesting times. We landed in Miami on fire one time.
Really?
That was interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know how much time we have here right
Well,
now.
we have about 4 more minutes. That's about it.
Well,
It's going fast, isn't it?
yes, it does. I have a lot of stories to tell. What I'm doing the last 4 minutes, I'm making movies for my great-grandsons, and they're called the Papa movies, because that's what they call me, is Papa. I do a 1 minute only because their attention span, they're 10 and 6. So I figured 1 minute, and I'm doing all of these side stories like landing on fire, when the airplane blew up under taxiing out. Just about ran into a mountain, ran out of oxygen almost over the Rocky Mountains. You know.
So you had a guardian angel looking over you, huh?
I certainly did.
Well, I'm glad of that.
And I'm here to tell about it, and I'm pretty proud of being a part of the Cold War. And all I can say is that we need to, my part was not that much, but others sacrificed a lot more than I did, and we should thank them more than me. I was just a small little.
No, important part. You know, as the saying goes, all gave some gave all.
But,
You know, but we all did our effort.
we
I was just wondering, you were, what, 6 years, right, in the Air Force?
that 5 years.
5 years?
I had to add a year because of the going to cadets. I signed up for 4, and I chose to add the extra year to become a commissioned officer.
And what rank were you when you got out?
Well, when I finally, after the reserves, I became a captain. So I went from airman to captain.
Yeah, that's a great career.
And we enjoyed it, and I brought back a wonderful souvenir from Maine. My wife of 57 years, and I owe a lot to her. I owe everything to that woman.
They say behind every successful man is a good woman.
Well, that was certainly true. I mean, without her, I would not have done what I've done and been as happy as I have been.
Quickly, when you got out of the service, what career did you enter into before you wound up moving down here?
Surprisingly enough, I ended up going to McDonald. I got my degree and went back to school on the GI Bill, which was the greatest thing ever invented.
Sure is.
I got my civil engineering degree, went to work for McDonnell Aircraft as a stress engineer. So then I ended up help building weapons, the F-4 Talos missile, worked on Gemini spacecraft.
Oh, what a career, my friend.
I had a great life there. After that, I went to work for Exxon and SO Engineering at that time, helping build refineries and things like that. And then even after that career, I had my own company doing computer centers and computer type work. So I was a jack of all trades, and I enjoyed every minute of it. Been retired 20 years now, and fortunate to be here in Florida and neighbors like you.
Well, you can't help what you get for neighbors, you know.
Yeah,
you're stuck with me, you know.
That's great. That's great. We have a great group in the plantation, as you know. There are a lot of vets, and so that's pretty well my overview of my story. There's a lot of little sidelines, but.
Well, we're just about out of time.
All right.
So, I do really want to thank you for coming, Bill, and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me, Bob.
And you know what's going to be nice about this is those grandkids, they can watch this and see Papa.
Well, I don't know if it's as thrilling as some of these things that they do with their games and so forth, but
well,
maybe back
when they get older, I think they'll start to realize, you know.
Let's hope that we have left a little history. As I see it, as I think it really is, history seems to change as time goes on. People try to remember, but by filming it, maybe we'll have a little truer story.
Yeah. Well, I hate to say this, I'm out of time.
You're out of time.
So thank you for coming again. And to all our veterans out there, our active military and their families, we salute you for all you do. Till next time. We are now entering our 3rd year salute here at Lakefront TV. We've had many great guests and veterans organizations share their stories with us. We'd like to hear from you too. If you're a veteran or a veterans organization, Lake Sumter counties, please give us a call. Lakefront TV can be seen all over Lake County and the villages and worldwide at lakefronttv.com.